people are going to be drifting in going, but given that it's coming up to 20 past 11 now, I think if we don't do that, we're never going to get going. So that's the luck of the draw. So the topic now for theme 8 is climate uncertainty. Is this an impediment to adaptation? And there have been a lot of reflections over yesterday and this morning around uncertainty. So I guess this group's going to try and pull that all together into some coherent thinking about uncertainty and the effect that it has on planning around adaptation. Well, that's the challenge for you this morning, ladies and gentlemen. So we're short of time, so I think we'll try and get going. We've got 4 panel members, and we have a provocateur, and the provocateur is Gavin Kenny from New Zealand. He's the director of Earthwise Consulting. I think he's going to tell you a little bit about himself, but he has a long experience of working in agricultural development and climate change, would that be fair, in Southeast Asia. So off you go, Gavin. 10 minutes.
So is this microphone working all right? Okay, just to be clear, just briefly about myself, I have actually about 20 years experience in climate change, mostly in the area of impacts, vulnerability and adaptation assessment. So it's sort of quite ironic for me in a way to have been asked to talk on uncertainty, because as I was putting my presentation together last week, I was remembering that the first ever talk I gave on climate change when I was based in the UK in 91-92 was actually on the topic of uncertainty, but that was a very different context to where I'm coming from today. Through the 1990s, my work in climate change was a lot of that was focused around modelling impacts of climate change and involved in development of what we called an integrated assessment model that we developed originally in New Zealand, and we also used for a vulnerability and adaptation assessment project in Bangladesh, and further developed as a training tool for capacity development in the Pacific Island countries as part of the Pacific Island Climate Change Assistance Program in the late 90s. So a lot of my work through the 1990s was around taking output from general circulation models and running it through impact models, and a key part of that was looking at the scientific uncertainties for different sectors. The conclusion I came to after 10 years of that work was that actually we were leading to what I would call do-nothing responses. So at the end of the 90s, I actually underwent a change of direction. I resigned from a senior research fellow position and moved myself out to working independently and interacting a lot more with people on the ground. And the result of that work over the last 10 years is that my work and thinking around uncertainty and other issues related to adaptation has changed completely. So my first question here is about, are we talking about climate change model uncertainty or real climate uncertainty, which is what people in their daily lives are dealing with, and that's certainly what I've learnt a lot from farmers, not just in New Zealand but elsewhere over the last decade. So what does current variability and vulnerability to climate change mean? We've already heard in the session this morning about what's happening in the Himalayas, and I have this quote here from a local village leader in the Annapurna region of Nepal, and essentially what he's saying there is that the very essence of their mountains are being lost already with snow melting and less snowfall and accelerated melting of the glaciers. In the short term, some people in that area are benefiting with warmer temperatures. For example, they can grow their crops, more crops, and for more throughout the year. But the long term, the implications of that melting are huge, not just locally, but when we take into consideration that the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, the seasonal snow melting from those regions feed the major rivers in Asia. So these things are already happening. Similar in the Pacific Islands, where the slogan they developed in the 90s for the Pacific Island Climate Change Assistance Program was in Vanuatu, island belong Yumi, life belong Yumi, our islands, our lives. So we're not just talking about, as people have talked already in this forum, we're not just talking about environmental changes, we're talking about people's lives being affected, and that's happening now. So one of my questions in terms of matching a long-term vision for adapting to climate change with short-term priorities for dealing with vulnerability to current climate variability is, do we know what path we're on? The main priority for most countries is still around economic growth and development, and that implicitly requires ongoing exploitation of resources and ongoing high inputs of fossil fuels. That's the reality of ongoing economic development. And a lot of what I see as so-called adaptations are happening in the context of what I call high input or high carbon pathways. So the potential cost over time of those pathways is significant costs of readjustment to more low input, more resilient, more sustainable pathways. And just to give two examples that I'm aware of, one from New Zealand and one from Egypt, both around the issue of water. In New Zealand, historically, we had dairy farming as a significant contribution to our economy. Dairy farming in New Zealand developed over 100 years or so around family farms that fixed nitrogen through clover grasses. They supported families. They stored hay for times of shortage, particularly in the summer, so they were quite internal and resilient. Over the last 20 years, particularly the last decade, we've seen corporatisation of dairy farming, expansion into drier regions, a higher dependence on irrigated agriculture, huge capital investments into farming now, and in the last decade in particular, an increased dependence on imported palm kernel, which is a byproduct of palm oil production. I think New Zealand has gone from about a decade ago importing no feed. They're now, I think, importing something like a quarter of the world's production of palm kernel. So now from being quite resilient systems, they've actually become more vulnerable. And a lot of what I see as adaptations happening in those around those farms around tweaking a system that I think long term is actually leading to more vulnerability rather than more resilience. Similarly, in parts of Egypt, there's been encouragement for an expansion of irrigated agriculture, particularly into areas like this photo here is from Bahariya Oasis, which is about 300 kilometres from Cairo. And with the encouragement of the expansion of irrigated agriculture, the artesian wells have dried up, and there's a photo of one there. 10 years ago, the water was freely flowing out of that well. Now they're having to pump deeper and deeper to get water. So they're currently mining their water, which is they're going to need a lot more in the future, I would say. So are we focused on adaptation or maladaptation at the moment? Are we clear about what we're adapting to? Matching long-term vision with short-term priorities, are we engaged in crisis response or change management? And the example I have here is from my friends who are actually sitting here, and I'd encourage you to go and look at their display upstairs. My friends from the Agri-Nature Learning Centre in Thailand, and I met them 3 years ago, and they're one of the best examples that I've seen in the places I've been to of people who are acting proactively. They're not worried about uncertainties. They're responding to what they're seeing happening not just in Thailand but in the world generally. And from the actions of one man 14 years ago to go and put the king of Thailand's philosophy around the sufficiency economy, one man starting on a degraded piece of land, they now have 15 action-focused learning centres around Thailand. So there's an example of people who are acting at a grassroots level. We had the discussion about mainstreaming this morning, and they're not doing nothing in an increasingly uncertain world. They're acting proactively and engaging increasing numbers of people in this country. Do we understand enough about human behaviour in relation to uncertainty? It's the whole issue of psychological change I've heard touched on a bit in this forum, but not talked about a lot. But to me, it's fundamentally important. And so when we talk about how we deal in uncertainty, I put it out to you. How do you deal with uncertainty in your own lives? When I look at myself, if I treat uncertainty as an external process, then it's something I talk about it. If I actually internalise uncertainty within myself as something that I have to take on board in my daily life, then it's something I move more towards acting on. So I think that's something we need to realise around this topic of uncertainty and how we respond to climate change generally, is that it's not just about, or that this whole process of engaging people requires us to think very carefully about how we go about doing that. A Thai Buddhist saying, uncertainty is certainty. And the question I want to put around that is, at what point does the question of uncertainty become meaningless? Is it already a meaningless question in the sense that there are already people that are living on the edge, as, for example, these Char people in Bangladesh? So, do we wait for certainty before we start acting, and at which point the effects that we experience are significant and probably in some cases beyond our capacity to actually adapt? So at what point does this question of uncertainty actually become meaningless? Is it now, or is it some time out into the future? Or do we need to, as some people have been saying, just simply focusing on doing what we're able to with what we know? So some key issues, priorities as I see them, and I've already heard this said in the forum, scientific uncertainty is not an excuse for paralysis. But my question there is, do we know the path that we're following? Do we have some collective vision or idea of where we're going? Dealing with scientific uncertainty is vastly different from dealing with human psychology in relation to uncertainty and change. We need to focus a lot more on human behaviour, or the process of psychological change. A resilience approach, which I've again heard a lot about. We need to be sure that we clearly understand what resilience means. And to reaffirm again what I've heard a lot of in this forum, we need to work a lot more closely with people on the ground who are already acting proactively. I believe there's a lot for us to be learning. So just to reiterate my key questions for the panel and hopefully for some discussion, are we talking about climate change model uncertainty or what people are dealing with in their daily lives? Are we clear about the path that we're on? Do we understand enough about human behaviour in relation to uncertainty? And at what point does the question of uncertainty become meaningless? Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin, very much for that. That gives us a good start. It's a wide-ranging but provocative, I think, which is your role, discussion of uncertainty. And now we have 4 panellists that we'd like to bring on board to address this problem further. And the first one is from Nepal, and is, if I can make a wild stab at his name, Meen Pudyal Chetri. But he's told me I can call him Meen because that's much easier to pronounce. So Meen is the General Secretary of the Nepal Centre for Disaster Management, so a man in a very good position to talk to us a little bit about uncertainty. So please, go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, I would like to express my kind gratitude to UNEP for giving me this chance to attend this wonderful conference. So while I will basically focus on Nepal, but Nepalese Himalayan have a great contribution to the world climate. Although Nepal is not contributing to global warming, but we are paying the cost, and global warming has tremendously impacted in